Inside room 722, 25-year-old Mona Lisa Abney lies dead on the floor.
She was nude basically from the waist down. She was kind of lying on her back. Automatically, you would think she was been raped.
The room appears to be ransacked, and Mona's cash, jewelry, and credit cards are missing.
The main thing you're looking for is fingerprints, because back then that was our DNA was fingerprint. So the big emphasis, hair, fingerprints, blood.
Boatwright dusts for prints, bags the evidence, and photographs the scene. Then it hits him. The ransacking is staged.
Chair was turned over. The lamps were just turned over, but not really damaged in any way. Maybe someone did this just to make it appear that there was a tremendous struggle. You know, you've killed this woman, and yet you don't want to break the lamp.
A medical examiner establishes the victim was raped and strangled. Semen is collected, as well as an unknown Caucasian hair. Meanwhile, investigator Ron Yeager arrives at the Holiday Inn and begins to work the building, room by room, person by person.
Well, everybody's a suspect, from management right on down through the employees, guests, so on and so forth. We went through the entire roster of people that were there.
Meanwhile, the phone in Mona's hotel room rings. At the other end of the line, a man named Wilbert Abney.
He mentioned who he was. He said he'd been trying to reach his wife and couldn't. And I said, Mr. Abney, I said, I can't tell you anything about it right now, but your wife is deceased. He wasn't emotional. It wasn't emotional or anything like that.
Abney drives 2 hours to Fairfax County, IDs his wife's body, and gives a statement. His cold demeanor is startling to investigators, as well as to friends and family.
It was a Sunday evening, early Sunday evening, that we got the call from him.
Patricia Parker is Mona's friend.
And it was Wilbert, and I said, what's going on, what's wrong? He said, Mona's dead. And I just lost it. You know, I said, you know, you've got to be kidding. No, I just lost it. And he said, no, Mona's dead. He was so relaxed. When he said it, it was like, she's dead.
For Parker, the grief runs deep. So, too, does the suspicion that somehow Wilbert Abney was involved.
It was no sadness. No sadness at all. Just as if he's calling to say, you know, it may rain tomorrow. And as upset as I was, something just didn't sound right to me.
You have a question in your mind, is the husband involved? Things don't look necessarily that way, but is he involved in having somebody else do the job for him?
Still, Yeager's suspicions are heightened when Abney tries to collect an insurance policy taken out just a few weeks earlier.
I think it was $100,000 double indemnity, so which set him up very well. We learned who signed the policy. It was a forgery. His wife didn't sign the policy. Tells me we have more motive now.
Abney sues the insurance company for the funds, but loses the battle in court. Meanwhile, Yeager unearths another red flag. Abney was having an affair. When Yeager interviews Abney's girlfriend, she recalls a phone call from Abney the morning Mona was found murdered.
It was about 9:30 that morning that he called the lady and told her that his wife was deceased. About an hour later, I get the call from him. And that's when I tell him that she's deceased. So he has knowledge of her death before he ever talks to me. And that's when I realized, I said, that this man is my man. More and more fingers pointing in the right direction, but you can't put the man in the room. If you can't put him in the room, you can't charge him.
Abney passes a polygraph and provides prints and hair samples. None match up to the evidence.
So that's where we came up short all the time on things that would get a conviction.
On September 29th, cold case detectives find Wilbert Abney at home, living a quiet life. That, however, is all about to change.
We knocked on his door and he answered immediately. And Steve tells him what we're doing. You know, we're cold case homicide detectives. We're going to reinvestigate the murder of his wife from 28 years ago. You know, typically we expect to see a reaction of relief or someone that's actually glad that we're doing this, thanking us for doing this. And we got exactly the opposite. from Abney. His reaction was, well, why would you do that? Why would you go back and work on a murder from 28 years ago? Some bells and whistles started going off in our heads.
What an inappropriate reaction for somebody, who's reinvestigating your wife's murder.
In 1978, Abney told police he had never been inside the hotel where Mona was killed and had not had sex with his wife in 3 weeks. Cold case detectives asked for a sample of his DNA to confirm the story.
He refused. He said he didn't think he wanted to do that, and he at first he said he wanted to call a lawyer.
Abney balks at providing the sample until the current Mrs. Abney pulls her husband aside.
Well, Mrs. Abney stepped in, his current wife stepped in and said, can we talk in private?
And they're in the kitchen talking for a few minutes. And I know what happened in that kitchen. I know she told him, look, you had nothing to do with this. You're innocent. Give him the buccal swabs and help him. So the pressure really was on him at that point. So he came back in and he said, okay, I'll give it to you.
Back at the crime lab, Mary Green begins the comparison.
I did the same DNA process on that swab, and I was able to obtain a DNA profile, and it matched. It was a very strong match. The numbers were greater than the world population, or greater than 6 billion individuals.
The pieces of murder are starting to come together.
And it's clear that the original detectives thought that Abney was involved. They just couldn't put Abney in Northern Virginia during the time that Mona was killed, and that's what DNA gave us. We had the scientific advantage that they never had.
DNA lays the foundation, but cold case detectives need more. In the Abney murder book, they find it. A person no one has talked to in more than 25 years. In January of 2005, a man named Michael Clark entertains a knock on his door. On the other side, 2 homicide detectives looking for information about Clark's former neighbor, Wilbert Abney.
So we walk up to the door and knock on the door, and sure enough, he opens the door, and he says, I'm Michael Clark.
And he said something to the effect, where have you guys been? I've been waiting to talk to law enforcement for 20-some years now.
The phone rang early one Saturday morning. It was Abney. And he said to me, they have found Mona dead. Will you go with me to identify the body? Well, he picks me up in this little white Corvette, and he asked me to drive. And I agreed to do that. And before we got a mile from my home, I had a very uncomfortable feeling. But what I remember distinctly was his spending the life insurance proceeds from his wife's death. I remember specifically his talking about buying 12 custom-tailored suits, about buying a new Rolls Royce and a big house.
Abney is saying, I'm going to be a rich man. I've got all these life insurance policies. I'm going to be rich.
My gut says, this guy smells. There's something very, very wrong, and I was very uncomfortable being in the vehicle with him.
Mr. Clark said his mouth was just hanging open. He couldn't believe that this man was talking about. This clearly was not the demeanor of a man who just lost his wife.
At this point, we're about ready to enter the mouth of the Boulevard Bridge.
Clark and Abney drive over the bridge on their way to ID the body, when Wilbert Abney rolls down a window in the car.
Just as we got up to about this point, as soon as we got over water, Abney rolled that window down, took out what appeared to be latex glove, and tossed them over that railing. If Abney is able to do this to his wife, then my family, I'm feeling that perhaps my family's being threatened. If he's able to do that, what else is he capable of doing?
We just can't believe our good luck. We just can't believe that we stumbled into a witness of this importance.
More than 2 months after taking Clark's statement, cold case detectives walk into Wilbert Abney's house and begin to ask some hard questions.
So we go back and we sit in the living room, and Steve tells him, we got the DNA results. And he just looked at us, and Steve said, it's your DNA. He started lying. He started telling us some things that we knew were not true. He's really a very narcissistic person. I think he feels like he can control this situation. He can manage it.
Abney denies killing his wife, but offers no explanation for the DNA match. Then he agrees to a polygraph.
So from there, we went over to the local district attorney's office, and he took the polygraph and failed it miserably.
After a month of back and forth, Abney tells detectives he's ready to tell his story, what really happened that night at the Holiday Inn.
He said, I went there, I went to the hotel that night. So now we're getting a totally different story that we haven't heard before. I went into the room, we engaged in consensual intercourse, and I choked her with my belt, which we did on occasion, that she asked me to do.
According to Abney, Mona liked rough sex and asked to be choked. This time, however, she accidentally died.
There's the mark of the belt buckle on her neck. I mean, that's how much force was used, was that there was a belt buckle mark left on her neck. So clearly this wasn't an accident.
We had finally backed him into a corner where he realized he couldn't maneuver anymore, and he had to come up with some kind of an explanation. And this is the only thing he could come up with. Yeah, okay, I was there. Okay, it is my DNA because we had consensual intercourse. And yes, I did cause my wife's death, but it was an accident.
When detectives start asking questions, Abney realizes he hasn't covered all his bases.
What about the fact that her credit cards were missing, her ring was missing, her keys were missing, her cash was missing, things like that? What did he do with those things? And he'd forgotten about those. And he just had that deer in the headlights look, like, uh-oh, I didn't cover that one. He was in the hot seat at that point, and yeah, we had him. We had him.
In this case, you had the DNA that finally put this defendant, Mr. Abney, in the hotel room back in 1978. Because up to that point, he had denied being there, having sex with her. He lied through his teeth back in 1978, that he hadn't been there, that he hadn't had sex with her. And so he lied back then. Why do you lie? Because you're covering something up.
The jury doesn't buy Abney's story.
Unfortunately for Mr. Abney, he had told different stories, at various points in this case, and then I think his credibility just didn't weigh much with the jury.
After 4 days of trial, he is found guilty and sentenced to 28 years in prison.